Good day and welcome to the Connecting Material podcast for year 4 of the Narrative Lectionary 2021 to 2022. I am Pastor Kent. I am pastor at Our Saviors and Central Lutheran Churches of the Fairfax Lutheran Parish and of Fairfax United Methodist Church, all of Fairfax, Minnesota. And we are looking today at the text of Genesis 29, verse 1 through Exodus 2, verse 25. This is the story of the courtship and marriage of Jacob and Leah and Rachel. And we also we'll be going through the whole gamut of their story, all up and through the birth of Moses. There's no easy way to describe this unless we just get going into it. So let's do that right now. Last Sunday in worship, we heard the story of Jacob stealing Esau's blessing and then running in fear of Esau's revenge for Jacob's trickery. On the way, Jacob, of course, has to stop to rest before getting to his uncle Laban's house, and he has a dream. And dreams really play a lot of importance within, especially within the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. So he stops and rests, and he has this dream, and he sees this ladder reaching into heaven, with the posted on the ground and reaching to heaven. And there God stands with Jacob and repeats that promise that he had given to Abraham of descendants and land and blessing. And it is in that moment that Jacob comes to believe in the God of Abraham and Isaac and calls the place of his encounter with God Bethel, house of God. So we continue with the saga of Jacob at his uncle Laban's home. And here Jacob meets Laban's daughter, Rachel. And she is a beauty in his eyes. And he finds a place of safety there at Laban's home and quickly falls in love with Rachel. In exchange for marrying Rachel, Jacob agrees to work for Laban for 7 years. And it's Bible tells us that it was like a flash. So it didn't take long in his eyes. However, when the time comes for the wedding night, Jacob, who is known as the deceiver, gets deceived himself. Laban sends in not Rachel, the younger daughter, but his older daughter, Leah, because after all, the oldest daughter should be married first, right? Well, of course, Jacob is outraged, but he agrees to work for another 7 years for the hand of Rachel. And at the end of 14 years, Laban says, you need to have flocks. How are you going to support your family? And so Jacob agrees to work another 7 years in order to build up a herd to support his newly expanding family. And after a while, through Leah and Rachel, and then their handmaids Bilhah and Zilpah, given to Jacob to produce as these two sisters compete to see who can have the most babies. Jacob's family grows, and he adds to his 4 wives 12 sons and a daughter. And we will come to know these sons of Jacob in their birth order by these names: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And we'll remember those names because those will come up very important a few chapters from now. Actually, probably in the next book. All these sons became heads of their own family groups, later known as the 12 tribes of Israel. We'll get to that later. And then there's the daughter, whose name was Dinah. And we'll get more on her later also. But let's stick to where we are. When Jacob finally does return home with his huge entourage of 4 wives, 12 sons and a daughter, and a bunch of slaves or servants and livestock, he is worried. about his brother Esau. He knows Esau hated him when he left. And he's worried that Esau will hold that grudge for what he did in stealing his blessing. You remember that from last week? So he, as a part of his strategy, sends his household of 2 wives and 2 concubines, 12 sons and 1 daughter, numerous servants, and multiple livestock ahead of him in groups, so that if one group does get killed by Esau in his anger, the other ones can escape. So now he's alone there on the other side, on the east side of the Jabbok, and he spends the night there alone and contemplating, how am I going to face my brother? So in the early hours of the morning, someone comes in the dark and challenges Jacob to a wrestling match. And they wrestle through the night until it becomes dawn, where Jacob finally pins his opponent and demands a blessing. Well, the opponent asks him his name. He says, Jacob. He says, nope, you are now Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. And then the opponent blesses him. And then the opponent disappears. And it's in that moment that Jacob realizes he has encountered God face to face, and he's alive to talk about it. So morning has come, and Jacob finally has the courage to cross the river and face his brother. But instead of an angry Esau, he encounters a forgiving Esau, a jubilant Esau, a brother who hugs and kisses him, welcomes him home. And through their conversation at the end, Esau just tells him, let's go home, brother. And they all, Esau and his family, and Jacob/Israel and all his family, live happily ever after. Not at the end of the story, though. Maybe not so happily ever after. Because you remember that 11th son, Joseph, became Dad's favorite? He was also a scoundrel, just like his dad. You see, Joseph could have probably gotten away with murder. He was so favored. He was a tattletale. He reported everything his brothers did wrong. Add to that Joseph had these 2 dreams about Joseph's whole family coming and bowing down to him in subservience. Well, that was the last straw they were going to take. Now, one day Joseph goes out to his brothers in the field, bringing them lunch. 10 of the brothers have plotted against Joseph. And just cut the story short, the 10 end up selling Joseph, that little so-and-so, that tattletale, into slavery. And they tell Dad, a wild beast came and ate him. And of course, their father, Jacob, mourns the loss of his son. And they keep this secret. And Joseph ends up being sold into slavery in Egypt. Well, in Egypt, Joseph finds himself in trouble again when he is falsely accused of attacking Potiphar's wife. So, of course, he goes to prison. And while in prison, he interprets the dreams of 2 of his cellmates, both of which came true. The one ended up back in his position, forgiven, and the other one had his head lifted off. You get my drift? They both came true. Now, later on, Pharaoh has a dream, and that one surviving cellmate remembers, oh my goodness, I almost forgot. I did forget about my cellmate. He told us, he interpreted our dreams, and it came true. So Pharaoh brings him in. And what all of Pharaoh's magicians couldn't do, Joseph does. Interprets his 2 dreams. that tell about a coming famine. So Joseph is released from prison, and because of his wonderful interpretation and his wonderful suggestion to Pharaoh on what to do to survive the famine, Pharaoh says, "You're in charge of that. You're second in command to me." He moved from prison to the second in charge next to Pharaoh. Well, the famine did come, and his brothers came seeking food. They brought what they could to buy food for their families so they wouldn't starve to death. Another short ending here. You got to really read through this. But eventually, Joseph reveals his identity, and now the family would celebrate and would be brought over to Egypt where they could survive and live happily ever after, at least for almost 400 years. After which the new Pharaoh, who did not know Joseph, did not know the Hebrew story of their coming, and he made slaves of the Israelites, the Hebrews, in hopes that would keep them down and they would not overthrow Egypt. And they suffered in Egypt and cried out. Now that brings us into the book of Exodus. Now, our focus is going to be on Moses a little bit here. And Moses has been born into a very dangerous time for the Hebrew people when the Pharaoh, 400 years after Joseph, remember, demanded that all male babies of the Hebrews were to be thrown into the river. Well, there were some midwives in Egypt. They weren't Hebrews, but they were God-fearing midwives, and they disregarded the edict of Pharaoh. And they saved the baby Moses. And he is put into a basket in the river in hopes that someone compassionate will find him and save him. And he's found by Pharaoh's daughter. And this baby is called Moses. He's raised up in the Pharaoh's house. However, it doesn't go all sweet for Moses. Moses commits murder and then runs away. Folks, you gotta read the story of the first 2 chapters of Exodus. So Moses has run away. He gets married and tends the sheep for his father-in-law, Jethro. And it is there that Moses encounters the flaming bush. And, wait for it. Sorry, folks, you have to wait a little longer for that part of the story until next Sunday because time's up and the story stops here for the day until this coming Sunday when we do hear the story of Moses and the burning bush. Let's see you in church to hear this story. Come back next week right here, and we're going to hear more about the connecting material. And until then, God's blessings as you contemplate these stories of God's history with God's people. It's a wonderful time. Yes, God's blessings. May you be blessed the way God intends. Till next week, goodbye.